The rain hammered against the funeral home windows like accusations I'd been dodging for 15 years. I stood at the back of the room, watching mourners file past my father's casket, people who'd known him better in his final decade than I ever had. My black suit felt borrowed, foreign against my skin, much like everything else about being back in Millbrook after all this time. Sarah approached me during the service, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with that familiar precision she'd perfected since childhood. My sister had always been the organized one, the responsible one, the one who stayed. At 34, she looked exactly like our mother had at that age: sharp cheekbones, steel blue eyes, and a mouth that could cut glass when she was angry. "You actually came," she whispered, settling beside me on the back pew. "He was my father too." She let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. Could fooled me. "When's the last time you even called him, Marcus?" I didn't answer because we both knew it had been over 3 years. The silence stretched between us as Pastor Williams droned on about forgiveness and eternal rest. My father, Robert Kane, had been many things: successful businessman, pillar of the community, devoted husband to my stepmother Linda, but forgiving wasn't one of them. "You know," Sarah leaned closer, her voice barely audible over the pastor's eulogy, "he used to talk about you sometimes, especially after the heart attack last year." My chest tightened. I hadn't known about any heart attack. He'd sit in his study, looking at that photo from your college graduation, the one where you were both smiling. Linda would find him there, just staring at it. Sarah's fingers worried the tissue in her lap. But then he'd remember why you left, why you never called, why you missed Mom's anniversary service 2 years running. The pastor was asking everyone to bow their heads for a final prayer. I kept mine raised, studying the back of Linda's perfectly styled grey hair 3 rows ahead. She hadn't acknowledged my presence once since I'd arrived. "He hated you, Marcus," Sarah whispered, her words landing like stones in still water. "He hated that you were right about him, and he hated that he never got the chance to tell you he was sorry." Before I could respond, she was gone, moving to join the pallbearers. I watched my sister help carry our father to his final resting place, wondering if she realized she'd just told me to. Completely contradictory things. The graveside service was mercifully brief. As dirt hit the mahogany casket, I found myself thinking about the last conversation my father and I had shared. It was Christmas Day, 2009, in this very cemetery, standing over my mother's grave. He'd married Linda 6 months after Mom's funeral, and I'd called him a coward who couldn't stand being alone with his grief. He'd called me an ungrateful brat who'd never understood sacrifice. We were both right, and we were both wrong. But pride had kept us from admitting either. After the burial, people lingered in small clusters, sharing memories and checking their phones. I was heading for my rental car when a thin man in an expensive suit intercepted me. "Mr. Kane." "Marcus Kane, that's me. I'm David Holloway, your father's attorney. I wonder if I might have a word with you before you leave town." Something in his tone made me pause. This wasn't a casual conversation about settling affairs or signing documents. This was the voice of a man who'd been carrying a secret. "What about?" Holloway glanced around the cemetery, noting the dispersing crowd. "Your father's will was quite specific about the timing of certain revelations. Perhaps we could meet at my office tomorrow morning, say 9 o'clock. I'm flying back to Chicago tonight, Mr. Kane." Holloway's voice dropped lower. "I think you'll want to hear this before you go anywhere. Your father left very specific instructions about what should happen if you attended his funeral. The way he emphasized it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the October wind. My father had planned for this plan for the possibility that his estranged son might actually show up to watch him be buried." "What kind of instructions?" Holloway handed me a business card. 9 o'clock, Mr. Kane. "And Marcus, you might want to call your employer." "Something tells me you'll be staying in Millbrook longer than expected." Holloway's office occupied the top floor of the oldest building on Main Street, the kind of place where leather-bound books and mahogany dominated every surface. I changed my flight twice and spent a sleepless night at the Hampton Inn, alternating between curiosity and dread about what my father might have left me, if anything. Sarah was already there when I arrived, seated across from Holloway's massive desk with Linda flanked by a younger lawyer I didn't recognize. The tension in the room was thick, enough to cut. "Thank you all for coming," Holloway began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Before we begin, I should mention that Roberts will contain some unusual provisions." He was very specific about the order in which certain information should be revealed. Linda shifted in her chair, her designer handbag clutched tight in her lap. At 62, she was still an attractive woman, but grief had carved new lines around her eyes. She'd been good to my father, I had to admit that much. Their marriage had lasted 12 years, which was longer than some people thought it would. The standard bequests are straightforward, Holloway continued, reading from a document that looked substantial enough to choke a horse. Sarah, you inherit the house on Elm Street, your father's investment portfolio, and a cash sum of $200,000. My sister nodded, unsurprised. She'd been managing Dad's books for the past 5 years, so she probably knew his financial situation better than anyone. Linda, you received the house on Millbrook Lake, the vacation property in Vermont, and a cash sum of $500,000, along with your late husband's life insurance benefits. Again, no surprises. Dad had always been generous with Linda, and she'd earned every penny by nursing him through his declining health. Now, Holloway's tone shifted, becoming more formal. We come to the more unusual provisions. Marcus, your father has left you the family business, Kane. Construction along with all its assets, contracts, and obligations. The words hit me like a physical blow. Kane Construction had been my father's life work, built from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise that employed half the county. It was also the source of our final, irreparable argument. That's impossible, I said, finding my voice. I haven't been involved with the business in 15 years. I don't know anything about running a construction company. Nevertheless, Holloway continued, the company is yours, along with a personal letter from your father that I'm instructed to give you only in private. Sarah was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Linda looked like she'd been slapped. There's more, Holloway said. Marcus, you've also inherited your father's shares in several subsidiary companies, his collection of vintage cars, and, he paused, consulting his notes, a safety deposit box at First National Bank, along with these keys and specific instructions. He slid a small envelope across the desk. My name was written on it in my father's careful handwriting. What about the cabin? Linda asked suddenly. Robert always said the cabin would go to the cabin on Mirror Lake. Holloway interrupted gently. Has been left to Marcus as well, along with all its contents. Now I understood Linda's shock. The cabin had been in our family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather had built it during the Depression, and it was where my father had proposed to my mother in 1978. After she died, he'd talked about selling it, but Linda had convinced him to keep it. She'd spent countless weekends there, redecorating and making it her own. I don't understand, I said. Why would he leave me anything? We hadn't spoken in years. Holloway removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Your father came to me 6 months ago, shortly after his heart attack. He said he'd been thinking about legacy, not just money. But what kind of man he wanted to be remembered as. He was very specific about his wishes, and very clear about the conditions. What conditions? You have 30 days to decide whether to accept the inheritance. If you choose to take it, you must move back to Millbrook and personally oversee Kane Construction for a minimum of 1 year. If you decline, everything goes to a charitable foundation your father established. The room feels silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Outside, normal people were going about their normal lives, probably assuming that death was simple, that you buried someone and moved on. They had no idea how complicated the dead could be. He's trying to control me from the grave, I said finally. Perhaps, Holloway agreed. Or perhaps he's giving you an opportunity to understand something you couldn't see while he was alive. Sarah spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. What's in the letter? That's between Marcus and his father, Holloway replied. However, I will say this: Robert Kane was not the same man who argued with his son 15 years ago. People change, even when we're not there to witness it. I stared at the envelope containing my father's final words to me. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately. Another part wanted to burn it unread. Both impulses felt dangerous. I need time to think, of course. But Marcus, Holloway's expression was grave. The 30-day clock starts today, and there's one more thing your father wanted you to know before you make your decision. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small key attached to a plastic tag. This opens a storage unit on Route 9. Unit 47. Your father said you'd understand what it meant when you saw what was inside. I took the key, feeling its weight in my palm. Route 9 was where everything had started, where I discovered the truth that had driven me away from Millbrook and straight into a 15-year exile. What's in there? Sarah asked, Holloway shook his head. I genuinely don't know. Your father handled that arrangement personally as we filed out of the office. Linda caught my arm. For a moment, I thought she might say something cruel, but her eyes were just tired. He loved you, Marcus. Whatever happened between you two, whatever mistakes were made, he never stopped loving you. Then she was gone, leaving me standing on Main Street with my father's final mystery burning a hole in my pocket. The storage facility on Route 9 looked exactly like it had 15 years ago. Rows of identical metal buildings stretched across a gravel lot, each one hiding someone's discarded life. I drove slowly past unit after unit, remembering the last time I'd been here, remembering what I'd found and how it had changed everything. Unit 47 was in the back corner, isolated from the others. The lock was new, but the door showed signs of recent use scratches around the handle, worn spots in the paint where hands had gripped it. My father had been coming here regularly. The key turned easily, and the door rolled up with a screech of protesting metal. Inside, a single bare bulb illuminated a space that was obsessively organized, just like everything else in Robert Kane's life. File cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with dates going back 20 years. A desk sat in the center of the space, covered with neat stacks of documents. But it was the far wall that made me forget how to breathe. Photographs, dozens of them, arranged in careful chronological order like a shrine to secrets. Construction sites, building permits, city council meetings, handshakes between men in expensive suits. And in the center of it all, a photo I recognized my father and Mayor Thompson breaking ground on the new municipal building in 1995. The building that had never been built according to the original specifications. The building that had made certain people very rich and others very dead. My hands shook as I approached the wall of evidence. This was what I'd stumbled onto in 2009, what had led to our final confrontation. I'd been home for Christmas, bored and nostalgic, when I decided to explore some of my father's old job sites. The foundation work on the municipal building had always bothered me. Something about the concrete looked wrong. Too thin, mixed with too much sand. I'd taken samples, had them tested by a friend in Chicago who worked in materials engineering. The results had been damning. Substandard. Concrete, corners cut, safety margins ignored. When confronted with the evidence, my father had exploded. He'd accused me of trying to destroy the family business, of being an ungrateful son who didn't understand the pressures of running a company in a small town. But I pushed harder, demanding to know who else was involved, how long it had been going on. That's when he'd said the words that had ended our relationship. Some things are more important than being right, Marcus. Someday, you'll understand that family comes first. Even when family is wrong. I'd left Millbrook that night, convinced my father was just another corrupt businessman willing to compromise safety for profit. Now, standing in his secret storage unit, I realized how wrong I'd been. The files were meticulous. Every questionable project, every corner cut, every safety violation, all documented with the precision of a man building a case against himself. But as I read deeper, the real story emerged. My father hadn't been the architect of the corruption. He'd been its victim. The trail led back to Thompson and a consortium of local investors who'd been systematically pressuring contractors to cut costs on municipal projects. Companies that refused to play along found themselves excluded from future bidding, their permits delayed, their businesses slowly strangled by bureaucratic red tape. My father had tried to resist. The early documents showed him pushing back, demanding proper materials, refusing to compromise on safety. But Thompson had leveraged city contracts made up 60% of Kane Construction's revenue. Without them, the company would die, and with it, the jobs of 43 employees. So my father had made a devil's bargain. He'd cut corners where he thought it wouldn't matter, used substandard materials on non-critical projects, and kept detailed records of everything as insurance against the day when someone would demand accountability. That day had never come. Thompson had died of a heart attack in 2003. Taking his secrets with him. The other conspirators had moved away or passed on, leaving my father alone with his guilt and his evidence. I found a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death, addressed to the State Attorney General. It confessed everything: the corruption, the cover-ups, the compromised buildings that still stood throughout Millbrook. But it had never been sent. At the bottom of the pile, I found a manila folder with my name on it. Inside was a copy of the materials analysis I had done in 2009. Along with a note in my father's handwriting. Marcus was right. The concrete was substandard, the building unsafe. I had it demolished 6 months after our argument and rebuilt according to proper specifications, using company funds rather than city money. The official records show foundation issues discovered during routine inspection. No one was hurt. No one ever knew how close we came to disaster. I couldn't tell him then. I was too proud, too afraid of losing what little respect he had left for me. I let him think I was corrupt rather than admit I was weak. It was the worst mistake of my life. My legs gave out, and I sank into the chair at the desk. Everything I believed about my father, everything that had driven me away, had kept me away, had been wrong. He hadn't been a corrupt businessman. He'd been a man trapped between impossible choices, trying to protect his employees while documenting the crimes he'd been forced to commit. The municipal building had been torn down and rebuilt safely. The substandard concrete had never endangered anyone because my father had fixed his mistake, absorbing the cost personally rather than risk lives. And I'd never known. I'd spent 15 years believing the worst about him, nursing my righteous anger while he carried the weight of secrets that weren't entirely his to bear. I was still sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of my father's hidden integrity, when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Found something you need to see. Meet me at the cabin, now. The drive to Mirror Lake took 20 minutes through winding mountain roads that hadn't changed since my childhood. The cabin sat on a small peninsula, surrounded by towering pines that my great-grandfather had refused to cut down. It was smaller than I remembered, but perfectly maintained. Linda's influence was evident in the flower boxes and fresh paint. Sarah's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. I found her sitting on the dock, staring out at the water with an expression I couldn't read. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said without turning around. Something like that. I settled beside her, feeling the familiar creak of old wood under my weight. What did you want to show me? She handed me a shoebox. I found this in Linda's closet while we were cleaning out the bedroom. She asked me to sort through Dad's personal effects. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, all bearing postmarks from the past 15 years. Christmas cards I'd never received, birthday wishes I'd never read, apologies I'd never heard. He never stopped writing to you, Sarah said quietly. Every major holiday, every birthday, every time something important happened in town. Linda said he'd write them and then chicken out at the last minute. Said he was afraid you'd throw them away without reading them. I opened one at random, dated 3 years earlier. Marcus, Sarah tells me you got promoted to senior partner at your firm. I wanted to call and congratulate you, but I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. I'm proud of you, son. I always have been, even when I was too stubborn to say so. I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. You were right about the building, about the concrete, about all of it. I fixed it after you left, tore the whole thing down, and started over. Cost me nearly everything, but it was the right thing to do. You taught me that, even if I was too proud to admit it at the time. I miss you, Marcus. I miss having someone who holds me accountable. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Linda is wonderful, but she sees the best in everyone. You saw me clearly, and that was a gift I didn't appreciate until it was gone. Maybe someday we can talk again. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to send one of these letters. Love, Dad. My vision blurred as I folded the letter carefully. Sarah was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He did love you, she whispered. All those years, all that silence, he loved you, and he was sorry. But he didn't know how to fix what was broken. I should have called, I said. I should have tried harder to understand. You should have been braver, Sarah replied. You were his son, not his enemy. But pride is a hell of a thing, isn't it? We sat in silence as the sun set over Mirror Lake, two siblings mourning not just our father, but all the lost. Years that could never be recovered. In the distance, a loon called out across the water the same haunting sound I'd heard as a child, lying in the cabin's small bedroom and listening to my parents talk quietly on this same dock. Those had been good years, before my mother got sick, before Linda, before the corruption, and the arguments and the 15 years of silence that had followed. Those had been the years when Robert Kane was just my dad, and I was just his son, and love was simple enough that it didn't need to be explained or justified, or documented in unsent letters. What are you going to do? Sarah asked as we finally stood to leave. I looked back at the cabin, thinking about the 30-day deadline and the choice I had to make. I could return to Chicago, to my comfortable life and my successful career, leaving Millbrook and its memories behind forever. Or I could stay and try to honor my father's legacy, not the complex, flawed man he'd actually been, but the man he'd tried to become in the end. I honestly don't know, I said. But I'm starting to think that maybe not knowing is where wisdom begins. Kane Construction occupied a sprawling complex on the industrial side of town, a collection of metal buildings surrounded by equipment yards and material stockpiles. I hadn't set foot on the property since 2008, but it looked exactly the same, trucks lined up in military precision, tools organized with obsessive attention to detail, everything bearing the marks of my father's exacting standards. The main office was a different story. What I remembered as my father's Spartan workspace had been transformed into something warmer, more welcoming. Family photos lined the walls, plants softened the harsh fluorescent lighting, and a coffee station in the corner suggested that employees were actually encouraged to linger and talk. You must be Marcus. I turned to find a woman in her 40s watching me from the reception desk. She had kind eyes and prematurely grey, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her name tag read, Jennifer Walsh, office manager. I am. And you're the person who's been keeping this place running, I'm guessing. Jennifer smiled. Your father gave me a lot of freedom to make changes. Said he was too old to learn new tricks, but he wasn't too old to hire people who already knew them. She led me through the office, pointing out improvements made in recent years. The break room had been expanded, the conference room updated with modern technology, and individual offices had been redesigned to maximize natural light. It was clear that my father had been investing in his people, not just his equipment. The crew's been wondering when you'd show up, Jennifer said as we approached the door marked Robert Kane, President. Someone had added a small plaque below it, Marcus Kane, President, as if my decision had already been made. I haven't decided whether I'm staying yet, I know, but they're hoping you will. Things have been uncertain since your father's heart attack. Everyone's worried about what happens next. The president's office was a museum of my father's life. Awards lined the walls, photos documented major projects, and a bookshelf contained technical manuals spanning 4 decades of construction innovation. But it was the desk that stopped me cold. There, in a simple frame, was a photo I'd forgotten existed. My father and I on my 16th birthday, standing beside the half-finished frame of what would become the Millbrook Community Center. He'd brought me to work that day, taught me how to read blueprints and check foundation measurements. I looked young and eager, hanging on his every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. He looked at that picture every day, Jennifer said softly. Even when he was angry about something else, he'd glance at it and his whole expression would change. A knock on the door interrupted us. A man in work clothes and a hard hat stood in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a problem on the Morrison site. Foundation's not setting right, and the inspector's asking questions. Jennifer made introductions. Marcus, this is Pete Kowalski, our senior foreman. Pete, this is Robert's son. Pete's handshake was firm, calloused from 30 years of hard work. Your dad was a good man, fair boss, paid well, never asked us to do anything he wouldn't do himself. What's the problem with the Morrison project? I asked, falling back on familiar technical ground. Pete launched into a detailed explanation of soil conditions, concrete mixtures, and inspection protocols. As he talked, I found myself asking questions, suggesting solutions, thinking like the civil engineer I trained to be before life had taken me in different directions. You know your stuff, Pete said approvingly. Your old man always said you had a better head for the technical side than he did. He said that all the time, said you could spot problems he'd miss, think 3 steps ahead of the rest of us. He was proud of you, even if, Pete trailed off, suddenly uncomfortable. Even if we weren't speaking, I finished. It's okay, Pete. Everyone knows we had problems, for what it's worth. Pete said he regretted that. Talked about it more in the last year, especially after the heart attack. Said he'd made mistakes. Said he wished he'd been more like you when it came to standing up for what's right. After Pete left to deal with the Morrison site, Jennifer showed me the rest of the operation. The equipment yard was impressive. Newer trucks, well-maintained machinery, everything organized with military precision. The employee break area featured a bulletin board covered with photos of company picnics, charity drives, and construction milestones. Your father started doing more of this after 2010, Jennifer explained. Company events, community involvement, treating people like family instead of just employees. It was like something changed in him around that time. The year after our final argument, we ended the tour in the conference room, where project files covered a long table. I recognized some of the client's local businesses, municipal contracts, residential developments. But there were also projects I did expect: a new playground for the elementary school, donated labor for Habitat for Humanity, repairs to the senior center completed at cost. He started taking on more community work about 5 years ago, Jennifer said. Said the company had been taking from Millbrook for decades. It was time to give something back. I spent the afternoon reviewing files, trying to understand the scope of the business I'd inherited. Kane Construction employed 47 people, carried insurance for major municipal contracts, and maintained equipment worth several $1 million. It was a substantial operation, far larger and more complex than the company I remembered from my youth. But it was also struggling. The books showed declining profits over the past 3 years, increased competition from larger regional firms, and several major contracts that had ended without replacement. My father had been spending freely on employee benefits and community projects while the core business slowly eroded. We need new contracts, I told Jennifer as the day went down. Big ones, the kind that require significant bonding and proven track records. Your father knew that. He spent his last few months reaching out to state agencies, trying to get Kane Construction qualified for highway projects and major infrastructure work. Any luck? Jennifer hesitated. There's a proposal deadline next week for a major renovation project at the state university. $60 million over 3 years. Your father was working on the bid when he passed. I felt something stir in my chest. Excitement, maybe, or just the familiar thrill of a technical challenge. Where's the proposal? She led me back to my father's office and pulled out a thick binder from his desk drawer. The proposal was nearly complete, meticulously researched and professionally presented, but it needed finishing touches, final calculations, and someone with authority to sign the submission documents. Can we make the deadline? If you decide to stay, Jennifer said carefully. Yes. But Marcus, you should know this isn't just about money. If Kane Construction gets this contract, it establishes us as a major regional player. If we don't, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I spent another hour reviewing the proposal, making notes and checking calculations. It was good work, better than good. My father had learned from past mistakes, built in proper safety margins, accounted for every variable I could think of. This wasn't the corner-cutting operation I'd imagined. This was the work of a man who decided that doing things right was more important than doing them cheaply. As I prepared to leave, Jennifer handed me a key ring. Your father's office key, keys to the equipment, access codes for the security system, just in case you decide to stick around. What do you think I should do? She considered the question seriously. I think your father spent the last 15 years trying to build something you'd be proud of. I think he hoped that someday you'd come home and see what he'd learned, what he'd become. And I think 47 families are counting on someone who understands both the business and the responsibility. That evening, I sat in my hotel room with a university proposal spread across the desk. Outside, Millbrook was settling into another quiet night, the kind of evening I'd once found suffocating in its predictability. Now, it felt peaceful in a way that Chicago never had. My phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. How was your first day as a construction magnate? Complicated, I said. The business is bigger than I expected, but also more fragile. Dad was spending money faster than he was making it. Sounds like him. He always said money was just a tool. What mattered was what you built with it. There's a major contract proposal due next week. If we get it, the company's future is secure. If we don't, then 47 people lose their jobs, Sarah finished, including some families who've worked for Dad for 20 years. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a familiar burden. This wasn't just about honoring my father's memory or proving something to myself. Real people with real lives were depending on decisions I hadn't even known I'd have to make. Sarah, what do you think Dad would want me to do? Her answer came without hesitation. I think he'd want you to do what you think is right, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard. That's what he learned from you, Marcus, that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. After we hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of Millbrook. Somewhere out, there was the municipal building my father had torn down and rebuilt correctly. Somewhere out, there were dozens of other structures bearing the Kane Construction name, each one representing not just a job completed, but a commitment kept. I thought about my life in Chicago, successful, comfortable, predictable. I thought about the partnership I'd worked years to achieve, the client relationships I'd cultivated, the reputation I'd built in a city that barely knew my name. Then I thought about Pete Krowski's weathered hands and Jennifer Walsh's kind eyes. I thought about 47 families who depended on a company my father had spent his life building. I thought about a man who'd made mistakes and spent his final years trying to make amends, hoping that someday his son would come home and understand. I opened my laptop and began working on the university proposal. There would be time to make a final decision about staying in Millbrook. But right now, there was work to do. And for the first time in 15 years, I was doing work that my father would have been proud of. The university proposal was due at PM on Friday. I spent Thursday night at the office, fine-tuning calculations and checking references, when I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my father's business. Buried in the project files was a partnership agreement I'd never seen before, dated just 6 months prior to my father's death. Kane Construction had entered into a joint venture with Morris Development Group for major infrastructure projects. The arrangement gave Morris access to Kane's bonding capacity and reputation, while Kane gained access to Morrison's political connections and financial resources. The problem was, I knew Morrison Development. They were the same company that had been involved in the corruption scandal 15 years ago. The same developers who had pressured my father into cutting corners on municipal projects. Seeing their name on official Kane Construction letterhead made my stomach turn. I was still staring at the partnership documents when Jennifer arrived early Friday morning. "You're here early," she said, setting down a cup of coffee and a bag of donuts from Millbrook Bakery. "Jennifer, what do you know about Morrison Development?" Her expression immediately grew guarded. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. And don't give me the corporate line, tell me the truth." She sat down across from my father's desk, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "Morrison approached your father about 18 months ago. Said they wanted to put the past behind them, work together on bigger projects than either company could handle alone. And Dad believed them. Your father was cautious. He spent months investigating their current operations, talking to other contractors who'd worked with him recently. Everything checked out. They'd cleaned up their act, or at least appeared to have. I pulled out the partnership agreement. This gives Morrison access to all our bonding, our insurance, our reputation. If they screw up on a joint project, Kane Construction is liable for the damages. I know. Your father agonized over that decision. But Marcus, we needed their connections. The construction industry has changed since you've been gone. Small companies like ours can't compete for major contracts without partnerships, without political relationships. We simply don't have. What kind of political relationships? Jennifer hesitated, then pulled out a file folder I hadn't seen before. Morrison's primary investor is Richard Thompson Jr. The name hit me like a physical blow. Thompson Jr. was the son of the late mayor who'd orchestrated the corruption scheme 15 years ago. He'd taken over his father's development interests and, according to the file, had built them into a regional powerhouse. Dad went into business with Thompson's son. It's more complicated than that. Richard Jr. isn't his father. Everyone acknowledges that the old man was corrupt, but the son has been working to rebuild the family reputation. He's funded affordable housing projects, donated to schools, been transparent about his business dealings. I spent the next hour reviewing Morrison's recent projects. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Their construction quality was good, their safety record was excellent, and their financial backing was solid. But something felt wrong, the same instinct that had led me to test that concrete sample 15 years ago. Jennifer, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything about this partnership that feels off to you? She looked uncomfortable, glancing toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. There have been irregularities. Small things, mostly. Morrison requests copies of all our bids, even for projects they're not involved in. They ask detailed questions about our employee records, our insurance policies, our equipment schedules. That sounds like corporate espionage or due diligence for a partnership. Your father chose to interpret it charitably. The phone rang before I could respond. Jennifer answered, then handed it to me with a strange expression. It's Richard Thompson Jr. He wants to meet with you. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man who looked nothing like his father. Richard Thompson Jr. was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with an easy smile and expensive clothes that managed to look casual. He'd driven himself to the meeting in a modest sedan, rather than the flashy car I'd anticipated. Marcus, I'm sorry for your loss, he said, extending his hand. Your father was a good man. I know that might sound strange coming from me, given our family's history, but it's true. What do you want, Thompson? Direct. I like that. He settled into the chair across from my father's desk, completely at ease.
I
Want to make sure the partnership between our companies continues. Your father and I had built something good together, something that benefits both our businesses and the community. I've been reviewing the partnership agreement. It seems pretty one-sided. Thompson nodded as if he'd expected this response. Your father said you'd be suspicious. He also said you were smart enough to see past old prejudices if presented with facts. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a presentation he'd clearly prepared in advance. Morrison Development's recent projects were impressive. A senior center built ahead of schedule and under budget, affordable housing that actually looked livable, infrastructure improvements that had revitalized declining neighborhoods. My father was corrupt, Thompson said bluntly. He used his position to enrich himself and his friends at the expense of public safety. I've spent the last 10 years trying to undo that damage by going into business with the man he corrupted, by working with the man who eventually stood up to him. Thompson's expression grew serious. Did you know your father was the one who ultimately brought down the corruption scheme? He kept detailed records of everything, every compromised project, every cut corner, every safety violation. In 2011, he turned all that evidence over to the state attorney general. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. That's impossible. The investigation never went anywhere because most of the people involved were already dead or out of office. But your father's evidence led to new regulations, stricter oversight, and the kind of transparency that makes today's corruption much harder to hide. Thompson pulled up another file on his tablet. Here are the results of that investigation. Your father was granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation. He helped prosecutors understand how the scheme worked, how contractors were pressured into compliance, how the public trust was systematically violated. The documents were real. I could see the state letterhead, the official seals, the careful legal language. My father hadn't just documented the corruption. He'd been instrumental in ending it. Why didn't he tell me this? Because he was ashamed of his part in it, even though he was more victim than perpetrator. And because he hoped you'd come home someday and see what he built afterward, a company that does things right, that puts integrity before profit. I studied Thompson's face, looking for signs of deception. He seemed genuine, but then again, his father had been charming too. Assuming all this is true, what do you want from me? I want Kane Construction to submit a joint bid for the university project. With Morris's financial backing and political connections, plus Kane's reputation and technical expertise, we're guaranteed to win. The contract is worth $60 million over 3 years, enough to secure both our companies' futures. And if I say no? Thompson shrugged. Then you submit independently and probably lose to a larger firm from outside the region. 47 people lose their jobs, and Millbrook loses another local business to corporate consolidation. He was right, and we both knew it. The construction industry had changed dramatically in the past decade. Small regional firms were being squeezed out by national corporations with deeper pockets and better political connections. The partnership with Morrison might be my only chance to keep Kane Construction competitive. I need time to think about this, of course. But Marcus, Thompson stood and straightened his jacket. Don't let the past prevent you from seeing the present clearly. Your father learned to trust me because he took the time to understand who I am, not just who my father was. I'm hoping you'll do the same after he left. I sat alone in the office, trying to reconcile everything I'd learned. The father I thought I knew, the man I'd believed was corrupt, had actually been the whistleblower who'd brought down the corruption scheme. The partnership I'd assumed was suspicious might actually be my best hope for honoring his legacy. Jennifer returned with lunch and found me staring at the university proposal. How did the meeting go? Confusing. Thompson showed me documents claiming Dad was the one who exposed the corruption 15 years ago. Is that true? Jennifer's expression confirmed what I'd feared. Your father made me promise never to tell you about the investigation. He said it was his burden to bear, not yours. But it's true. He spent months gathering evidence, documenting everything he could remember. The prosecutors said his testimony was crucial to understanding how the scheme worked. He helped them draft new regulations to prevent it from happening again. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same grief I'd experienced at the storage unit, the same regret that had overwhelmed me at the cabin. Once again, I'd been wrong about my father. Once again, I'd spent years nursing anger based on incomplete information. Why didn't he just tell me? Why let me think he was corrupt? Because he was ashamed of his weakness, even though he ultimately did the right thing. And because he hoped that someday you'd come home and judge him based on what he'd built, not what he'd once been part of. The afternoon passed in a blur of phone calls and final preparations for the proposal submission. With Thompson's partnership, we could offer competitive pricing, superior technical capabilities, and the kind of political backing that made bureaucrats comfortable. Without it, we were just another small regional firm trying to compete with corporate giants. At 2:30 p.m., I made my decision. I signed the joint bid proposal, sealed it in the required envelope, and handed it to Jennifer for delivery to the university. "You're staying then?" she asked. "I'm staying," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "At least for the year Dad's will requires." "Maybe longer," Jennifer smiled. "Your father would be proud." "He always said you had the best instincts in the family once you had all the facts," as she left to deliver the proposal. I walked to the window and looked out at the equipment yard. Pete Kowalski was training a new employee on proper excavation techniques, taking the same careful approach my father had used when teaching me to read blueprints. The continuity was reassuring, the same standards, the same attention to detail, the same commitment to doing things right. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Heard through the grapevine that you're staying. Linda wants to take you to dinner tonight. She says she has something to tell you about Dad." I typed back, "Tell her yes. And Sarah, thank you for pushing me to see the truth. That's what family does," she replied. "We help each other see clearly, even when it's hard." Especially when it's hard, I thought, remembering my father's words from that last argument. Some things are more important than being right. I'd finally learned what he meant. Sometimes the most important thing is being open to changing your mind when new evidence emerges. The sun was setting over Millbrook as I locked up the office and headed to my car. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about the future of Kane Construction and my place in it. But tonight, I was having dinner with my stepmother, ready to learn whatever final secrets my father had left behind. For the first time since returning to Millbrook, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Linda had chosen Brennan's, the nicest restaurant in Millbrook, for our dinner. I found her at a corner table, dressed in black, but with a touch of color in her scarf, a small signal that she was beginning to move beyond the immediate grief of widowhood. "You look like your father when he was your age," she said as I sat down. "Same intensity. Same way of carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Sarah said you had something to tell me about Dad." Linda nodded, then flagged down the waitress and ordered a bottle of wine. "I do, but it's not easy to talk about. Your father made me promise to wait until after the funeral, until you'd had time to process everything else. We made small talk through the appetizer course, how I was adjusting to being back in Millbrook, whether I'd decided to keep the house on Elm Street, what I thought of the changes in town. But I could see the tension in Linda's shoulders, the way she kept glancing at her purse as if it contained something dangerous. "Marcus," she said finally, "what did you think of your father's marriage to me?" The question caught me off guard. I thought it was fast. MOM had only been gone 6 months when you two got married. It was fast, Linda agreed. Too fast, probably. But not for the reasons you might think. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather journal, worn soft with age and handling. "Your father kept a diary for the last 2 years of his life. He wrote in it every night, usually just a few sentences about work or family or things he was thinking about. After he died, I found it in his desk drawer with a note asking me to give it to you when the time was right. The journal felt warm in my hands, as if it had absorbed something of my father's presence." His handwriting covered the pages in neat, careful script, the same precise lettering I remembered from the notes he used to leave in my school lunch bag. "I've read it," Linda said. "I hope you don't mind, but I needed to understand some things myself. What you'll find in there, it explains a lot about why your father made the choices he did." I opened to a random page, dated about a year before his death. "Marcus called today, but I missed it. Linda said he was checking on a business matter. Nothing personal." I wanted to call him back, but what would I say? That I'm sorry, that I was wrong, that I've spent every day of the last 14 years wishing I could take back that argument. Linda says I should try anyway, that the worst he can do is hang up on me. But I know my son. He's stubborn like his mother, and he has every right to be angry. I just hope someday he'll understand that everything I did to protect the family, even when it looked like I was destroying it. I closed the journal, unable to continue reading in public. "Linda, why did you marry him so quickly after MOM died?" She took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "Because he was dying, Marcus. Not immediately, but the doctors had given him 5 years at most. His heart was already failing, and the stress of your mother's death had accelerated the damage. The words hit me like a physical blow. I didn't know. He didn't want you to know. He was afraid you'd come home out of pity rather than forgiveness. But Marcus, he was terrified of dying alone. Not physically. Alone, he had friends, colleagues, Sarah, but emotionally alone, carrying the weight of your estrangement. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I married him because I loved him. Yes, but also because he needed someone to help him through the hardest part of his life. Someone who could be there when the grief and the guilt and the regret became too much to bear alone. The guilt about Mom's death, the guilt about you, about the argument, about letting pride keep you apart for so many years. He blamed himself for driving you away, even though we both know it was more complicated than that. I thought about the storage unit, the evidence of systematic corruption that my father had documented and eventually exposed. I thought about the partnership with Morrison, the university proposal, the 47 employees whose livelihoods depended on decisions I was still learning to make. Linda, did Dad ever talk about the corruption investigation? She nodded slowly. It consumed him for months. He'd sit in his study until all hours, going through old files, trying to remember every detail of every compromised project. He was determined to tell the truth, even though it meant admitting his own complicity. Thompson Jr. told me Dad was the key witness. He was, but it cost him everything: his reputation in certain circles, his relationship with several old friends, his peace of mind. Some people never forgave him for cooperating with the investigation, but he did it anyway, because you taught him that doing the right thing was more important than protecting yourself. He used to say that the argument you two had was the worst thing that ever happened to him, but also the most important. It forced him to confront who he'd become and decide who he wanted to be. The main course arrived, but I'd lost my appetite. Everything I thought I understood about my father's choices was shifting again, revealing new layers of complexity and sacrifice. Linda, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Were you happy? In the marriage, I mean. Despite everything, the grief, his health problems, the weight of his regrets. Linda smiled for the first time that evening. I was happy, Marcus. Your father was a good man who'd made some bad choices. But once he decided to change, he became the kind of husband every woman hopes for: attentive, devoted, grateful for every day we had together. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He talked about you constantly. Your successes at work, your life in Chicago, things Sarah would tell him about your relationships or your travels. He was so proud of what you'd accomplished, even though he'd never been part of it. I should have called more. Yes, you should have. But Marcus, forgiveness isn't just about making amends with the living. Sometimes it's about making peace with choices that can't be changed, learning to carry grief without letting it poison everything else. We finished dinner in comfortable silence, both lost in memories and thoughts about the future. As Linda paid the check, she handed me a small key. This opens your father's desk drawer at home, the one in his study. There's something else he wanted you to have, but only after you'd read the journal and understood the context. The drive to the house on Elm Street took 10 minutes through residential neighborhoods. I remembered from childhood. Linda's car followed mine, and we walked together up the front steps I'd climbed thousands of times as a boy. The study was exactly as I remembered it: floor to ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, family photos arranged with mathematical precision. The locked drawer opened easily, revealing a single manila envelope with my name written in my father's careful script. Inside was a letter and a small velvet box. Marcus, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've decided to come home. I hope it also means you've learned the truth about the corruption investigation and understand why I made the choices I did. The ring in this box belonged to your mother. She gave it to me on our 10th anniversary, said it represented all the years of marriage still ahead of us. When she died, I couldn't bear to look at it. It reminded me of all the time we'd lost to her illness, all the conversations we'd never have. I want you to have it now, not because you need another reminder of her love, but because it represents something I failed to give you: the certainty that family endures beyond arguments and misunderstandings and years of stubborn silence. I made mistakes, son. I was weak when I should have been strong, silent when I should have spoken, proud when I should have been humble. But I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping that someday you'd find your way home. The company is yours now, along with all the responsibility and opportunity that comes with it. Use it to build something good, something that makes the community stronger. Use it to employ good people and create lasting value. Use it to prove that the Kane name still means something worth preserving. But most importantly, use it to understand what I learned too late, that success isn't measured in dollars or contracts or political connections. It's measured in the lives you touch, the trust you earn, and the legacy you leave for the people who come after you. I'm proud of you, Marcus. I'm proud of the man you've become and the principles you've held onto. Even when they cost you, don't let my mistakes define your future, but don't forget the lessons they taught us both. Love, that peer says. Linda has been a gift I didn't deserve. Please take care of her as she took care of me. The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small diamond, elegant in its understated beauty. I slipped it onto my pinky finger, where it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me to claim it. Linda was crying openly now, remembering her own grief and the man we'd both lost. I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling the strange comfort of shared sorrow. He was a good man, I said. Yes, he was. Flawed and human, and sometimes wrong, but fundamentally good. That's what I hope you remember, Marcus. That's the father you should carry forward. We stood together in the study, surrounded by the physical evidence of Robert Kane's life, his books, his awards, his carefully preserved memories. But what mattered wasn't the things he'd accumulated. It was the understanding he'd achieved and the love he'd never stopped trying to express. I thought about the journal in my car, full of his private thoughts and regrets. I thought about the company I'd inherited and the employees who were counting on me to make the right decisions. I thought about the partnership with Morrison and the university proposal that might determine the future of everything my father had built. Most of all, I thought about the man I wanted to become, not the angry young idealist who'd fled Millbrook 15 years ago, but someone who could hold on to principles while accepting the complexity of human nature. Someone who could build bridges without compromising foundations. Linda, I said as we prepared to leave, would you like to have dinner again next week? I think there's a lot more I need to learn about the man who raised me. She smiled through her tears. I'd like that very much. Your father always said the best conversations happened over food and wine, when people felt safe enough to tell the truth. As I drove back to my hotel, I thought about truth and how it had evolved over the past week. The truth about my father's corruption had become the truth about his redemption. The truth about his silence had become the truth about his shame and love. The truth about his legacy had become the truth about my own responsibility to honor it properly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about the future of Kane Construction and my place in Millbrook. But tonight, I was finally beginning to understand the man whose name I carried, and the inheritance that went far beyond money or property. I was beginning to understand what it meant to be Robert Kane's son. The call came at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after we'd submitted the university proposal. I was in the office early, reviewing payroll and trying to understand the financial pressures my father had been facing, when Jennifer knocked on the door with an expression I couldn't read. That was the university, she said. They want to meet with us this afternoon to discuss our proposal. My heart sank. In my experience, good news came in the form of congratulations, not meetings. Did they say anything else? Just that they'd like to speak with the principals of both Kane Construction and Morrison Development at 2 p.m. Richard Thompson Jr. arrived at the office an hour before the meeting, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of confident smile that made me nervous. He'd brought his project manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Santos, who seemed to know more about university construction requirements than I'd ever learned. Nervous? Thompson asked as we walked to his car. Realistic, I replied. If they were awarding us the contract, they'd have said so over the phone. The drive to the university took 20 minutes through countryside that was showing the first hints of autumn. Thompson used the time to review strategy, potential objections, and ways to salvage something positive, even if we didn't get the full contract. The important thing, he said, is to maintain our partnership regardless of what happens today. This is just one project. There will be others. The university's facilities management office was located in a converted mansion on the edge of campus, all brick and ivy and old money prestige. We were shown into a conference room where 3 people waited around a polished table: Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the facilities director, James Morrison, the university's chief financial officer, and a younger man introduced as Tom Bradley from the State Oversight Committee. Thank you for coming, Dr. Hoffman began. We've spent considerable time reviewing all the proposals for the dormitory renovation project, and I have to say, your joint submission was impressive. Thompson and I exchanged a look. That sounded promising. However, she continued, we have some concerns about the partnership arrangement between your companies. Specifically, we're troubled by Morris Development's past associations. My stomach dropped. They've done their homework on Thompson's father and the corruption scandal. I understand your concerns, Thompson said smoothly. My father's actions were reprehensible, and I've spent years trying to rebuild our reputation through transparent, ethical business practices. We're aware of your efforts, said Morrison, the CFO, but the university has to be extremely careful about perception as well as reality. Any hint of impropriety reflects badly on the institution. Tom Bradley leaned forward. The State Oversight Committee has reviewed the documentation you provided about the corruption investigation and Robert Kane's cooperation with prosecutors. That actually works in your favor. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical practices. I felt a flicker of hope. My father's whistleblowing might actually help us. However, Bradley continued, we're concerned about the financial arrangements in your partnership agreement. Morrison Development would receive 60% of the profits despite Kane Construction doing most of the actual work. That suggests Morrison is providing something other than labor and materials political influence. Perhaps Thompson's confidence faltered slightly. Morrison brings financial backing and regional connections that Kane Construction lacks. It's a legitimate business arrangement. I'm sure it is, Dr. Hoffman said. But perception matters in public contracts. We can't award a $60 million project to a partnership that might be viewed as politically motivated. The room feels silent. I could feel the opportunity slipping away, along with the future of Kane Construction and the jobs of 47 employees. Then Tom Bradley said something that changed everything. We'd like to award the contract to Kane Construction directly, without the Morrison partnership. Thompson went rigid. That's not possible. The bid was submitted jointly. You can't separate the partners. Actually, we can, Bradley replied. Kane Construction has sufficient bonding capacity and insurance coverage to handle the project independently. The technical specifications and pricing were primarily Kane's work anyway. I looked at Thompson, seeing the calculation in his eyes. Without this contract, Morris Development would lose a significant revenue stream and the political credibility that came with major university work. Marcus, Thompson said carefully, our partnership agreement gives Morrison specific rights regarding joint bids. You can't accept a contract that was submitted on behalf of both companies. I can if I withdraw from the partnership, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. That would be a breach of contract. Morrison would be entitled to damages. Dr. Hoffman intervened. Gentlemen, we're not interested in facilitating a business dispute. Kane Construction. Are you prepared to take on this project independently? I thought about my father's journal, about his determination to build something worthy of respect. I thought about Pete Koralski and Jennifer Walsh, and all the other employees who trusted the Kane name for decades. I thought about the evidence in the storage unit and the corruption my father had ultimately exposed, even at great personal cost. Yes, I said. Kane Construction can handle this project without a partner. Thompson's face flushed with anger. This is a mistake, Marcus. You're burning bridges you'll need later. Maybe, I agreed, but I'm building something more important. The rest of the meeting was a blur of technical details, timeline discussions, and contractual requirements. Kane Construction would begin work in 3 weeks, complete the project in 18 months, and receive payments based on verified milestones. It was the largest contract in the company's history, and I'd just committed to handling it without the financial backing I'd assumed we'd need. Thompson left without saying goodbye, but Rebecca Santos lingered in the parking lot. For what it's worth, she said, I think you made the right choice. Thompson's not like his father, but he's not as reformed as he pretends to be either. What do you mean? Morris Development has partnerships with 6 other regional contractors. Same arrangement, they provide financial backing and political connections in exchange for majority profit. Shares. It's a way of controlling the market without appearing to do so. And you're telling me this because? Rebecca smiled. Because your father offered me a job 3 years ago. Said Kane Construction needed someone who understood both the technical and political sides of major projects. I turned him down because I was committed to Morrison. But the offer stuck with me. She handed me her business card. If you decide you need a project manager for the university job, someone who knows how to navigate bureaucracy without compromising integrity, give me a call. The drive back to Millbrook gave me time to process what had just happened. I'd won the largest contract in Kane Construction's history, but I'd also made an enemy of a powerful regional developer. I'd proven that the company could compete independently, but I'd also committed to delivering on promises I wasn't certain I could keep. Jennifer was waiting when I returned to the office, along with Pete Kowalski and several other senior employees who'd somehow heard about the meeting. Well, Jennifer asked. We got it, I said. The full contract. 60 million over 18 months. The cheer that went up in the office was loud enough to attract attention from the equipment yard. Within minutes, the news had spread throughout the company, and people were shaking hands and talking about overtime opportunities and job security. But Pete Kowalski pulled me aside with a more serious expression. This is great news, Marcus, but are you sure we can handle a project this size? 60 million is a lot of responsibility. We'll need to hire additional crew, maybe subcontract some specialized work. But yes, I think we can handle it. What about Morrison? Thompson's not going to be happy about losing this contract. I thought about Rebecca Santos's warning and Thompson's parting words. We'll deal with Morrison if we have to. Right now, let's focus on doing the job right. That evening, I called Sarah to share the news. Dad would be proud, she said. He always believed Kane Construction could compete with anyone if they had the right opportunities. I hope so. I just committed to the biggest project in company history, and I'm not entirely sure I know what I'm doing. Nobody ever knows what they're doing when they're building something new, Sarah replied. That's what makes it worth doing. After we hung up, I sat in my father's office, looking at the photo of us together at the construction site. I thought about the 15-year-old boy in that picture, hanging on his father's every word, believing that construction was simply a matter of following blueprints and building to specifications. Now I understood that real construction, was about navigating complexity, managing relationships, and making decisions based on incomplete information. It was about balancing idealism with pragmatism, principles with practical necessities. My father had learned these lessons the hard way, through mistakes and corruption and years of carrying guilt about compromises he'd made. I was learning them differently, but the core challenge remained the same: how to build something lasting and valuable while maintaining integrity in a world that often rewarded expedience over ethics. The university project would test everything I thought I knew about construction, business, and leadership. It would determine whether Kane Construction could survive and thrive under my direction, or whether I'd inherited a legacy I wasn't capable of preserving. But as I looked around the office my father had built, at the photos of projects completed and employees celebrated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the excitement of a challenge worth meeting, the anticipation of building something that would outlast the builder. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new decisions, new tests of judgment and character. But tonight, I was Robert Kane's son, heir to a company and a reputation that meant something in this small corner of the world. And for the first time since returning to Millbrook, that felt like exactly who I was supposed to be. The problem started 3 weeks into the university project, just as we were completing the foundation work for the first dormitory renovation. I was on site when Pete Kowalski approached me with a concerned expression that immediately put me on alert. Marcus, we need to talk. Privately, we walked away from the construction crew to a quiet corner of the site, where Pete pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photos. I took these this morning when I arrived early to check on yesterday's concrete pour. Someone was here overnight. The photos showed footprints in the wet concrete around the foundation supports, along with what appeared to be tampering with the rebar placement. It was subtle, the kind of sabotage that might not be discovered until the concrete was tested, or worse, until the building was under load. How bad is it? I asked. Bad enough that we need to tear out this entire section and start over. That's a week's delay and about $50,000 in materials and labor. My mind immediately went to Thompson and Morrison Development. Losing the university contract had cost them significant money and credibility, and Thompson had made his displeasure clear in several heated phone calls over the past month. Pete, I want you to document everything. Photos, measurements, witness statements if anyone saw anything unusual. And let's install security cameras before we pour the replacement concrete. You think this was deliberate? I think we need to assume it was and protect ourselves accordingly. The next incident happened 4 days later. Jennifer called me at AM, her voice tight with stress. Marcus, you need to get to the office immediately. We've been robbed. I dressed quickly and drove through the empty streets of Millbrook, arriving at Kane Construction to find 2 police cars in the parking lot and Jennifer standing outside with a clipboard, cataloging what had been taken. They got into the office through the back door, she explained, took some equipment from the yard. But more importantly, they accessed our computer system and deleted files related to the university project. Officer Dave Martinez, whom I remembered from high school, was dusting for prints near the damaged door. Looks professional, he said. They knew exactly what they were looking for and how to get it without triggering the main alarm system. What files were deleted? I asked Jennifer. Project schedules, supplier contracts, employee records for the university team, everything backed up automatically to the cloud. So we didn't lose the actual data, but someone wanted to disrupt our operations. Over the next 2 weeks, the problems escalated. Concrete suppliers reported mysterious cancellations of orders placed by Kane Construction. Equipment rental companies claimed their contracts with us had been terminated. 3 of our newest employees quit suddenly, citing better opportunities with other regional contractors. Each incident was small enough to be explained as coincidence or bad luck, but together they formed a pattern of systematic harassment designed to undermine our ability to complete the university project on time and within budget. The breakthrough came when Rebecca Santos called me on a Friday evening. Marcus, we need to meet. There's something you need to know about what Thompson is planning. We met at a coffee shop in the next town over, far enough from Millbrook to avoid unwanted attention. Rebecca looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if expecting surveillance. I quit Morrison Development yesterday, she said without preamble. Thompson's been using the company's resources to sabotage your university project. Can you prove it? She pulled out a flash drive. Emails, financial records, instructions too. Subcontractors to break contracts with Kane Construction. Thompson's convinced that if your project fails, the university will have to rebuild it, and Morrison will be in a position to win. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and scrolled through dozens of damaging documents. Thompson had been thorough bribing suppliers to cancel orders, paying employees to quit, even hiring the crew that had damaged our concrete work. Why are you showing me this? Because what Thompson's doing is wrong, and because I believe in what your father built. Kane Construction has a reputation for integrity that's rare in this industry. I don't want to see it destroyed by someone who can't compete fairly. Rebecca's information was enough to file criminal charges, but it also presented a strategic problem. If I went to the police immediately, the resulting investigation would delay the university project indefinitely. The scandal would damage Kane Construction's reputation even if we were ultimately vindicated. What do you suggest? I asked. Confront Thompson directly. Use the evidence as leverage to make him back off. He's smart enough to know when he's beaten. Monday morning, I called Thompson and arranged a meeting at his office. I brought Jennifer for witness purposes and Pete Kurowski because his presence tended to discourage people from making threats they couldn't back up. Thompson's office was everything I'd expected: expensive furniture, awards and photos documenting political connections, the kind of power display that impressed people who didn't look too closely at the substance beneath. Marcus, what can I do for you? I set the laptop on his desk and played one of Rebecca's recorded phone conversations, in which Thompson clearly instructed a subcontractor to break their contract with Kane Construction. Thompson's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. Rebecca Santos is a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. That recording could be fabricated. Maybe. I agreed, but there are dozens of them, along with financial records showing payments to people who've been sabotaging our project. Should I play more? Or do you want to discuss how we're going to resolve this situation? The negotiation took 2 hours. Thompson agreed to stop all interference with the university project and to compensate Kane Construction for delays and additional costs his sabotage had caused. In exchange, I agreed not to file criminal charges or share the evidence with his other business partners. You are making a mistake, Thompson said as we prepared to leave. This industry is built on relationships and mutual respect. You're burning bridges you'll need later. I'm protecting the integrity of my company, I replied. Something my father taught me was more important than any individual relationship. The university project proceeded smoothly after that, but the experience had taught me valuable lessons about the challenges of running a construction company in a small market dominated by a few powerful players. Thompson's sabotage had been sophisticated and nearly successful without Rebecca's inside information. We might have lost the contract and possibly the entire company. I was reviewing progress reports in my office when Jennifer knocked on the door. There's someone here to see you, Jennifer said from the doorway, her voice louder than usual, carrying the careful tension that always precedes something important. I looked up from the desk, expecting another supplier issue or an early inspection, but it wasn't that. Standing behind her was a man in his early 60s, tall, lean, with a military posture and silver hair combed back from a lined forehead. His suit was pressed, but not expensive. His expression? Unreadable. Marcus, Jennifer said, stepping aside. This is Daniel Turner. He says, he knew your father. The man extended a hand, and I stood automatically to shake it. I was Robert's friend, he said simply, and his accountant. But that's not why I'm here. He paused, glanced around the office, the framed photos, the nameplate on the desk, the construction plans spread out like blueprints for legacy. I'm here because your father left one final instruction. For you alone. We sat in the conference room, the only place I could think of that felt neutral enough for whatever was coming. Turner pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Your father prepared this 2 weeks before his death, he said. He didn't trust electronic storage. Said this was a matter for pen and paper. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter, a flash drive, and a faded photo of my father, much younger, standing beside a man I didn't recognize in front of a construction site marked Millbrook Correctional Facility 1992. The letter was short. Marcus, if you're reading this, then I did what I couldn't do in life, bring you home and trust you with the truth. That prison project, it was the beginning. Before Thompson, before Morrison, before the town knew our name. I made compromises back then that cost lives not directly, but slowly, over time. Faulty plumbing, substandard HVAC systems, corners kept by men I trusted. I knew, and I stayed silent. Until one man, an inmate named Elijah Harmon, died from heat stroke during a summer outage. We could prevent it. That was the moment I started keeping records, not just to protect myself, but because I couldn't live with the weight. The folder on the flash drive contains sealed testimony, names, payment logs, engineering assessments. I never found the courage to make it public. But you can, or you can bury it forever. I won't blame you. You've already carried enough for both of us. But if you choose to reveal the truth, know this, it will cost us everything we built. Legacy isn't what we leave in buildings, Marcus. It's what we leave in choices. I trust yours. Love. Dad. I sat in silence for a long time after that. Jennifer eventually peeked in. Everything okay? I nodded, though my hands were shaking. No, I said quietly, but it will be. I stood in front of the town hall auditorium, the flash drive heavy in my pocket, the same way truth always is. Behind the curtain, Sarah waited with a worried expression. She knew what I was about to do. We both did. The town had gathered contractors, city officials, former employees, even Linda. The press was here too, their cameras poised. Like vultures, I could still walk away, say nothing, burn the drive and go back to rebuilding Kane Construction with integrity. But then I thought of Elijah Harmon, a name that had lived in my father's guilt for 3 decades. I stepped up to the microphone. My name is Marcus Kane. I'm the new president of Kane Construction. And today, I'm not here to talk about contracts or growth or legacy. I paused, feeling the room shift around me. I'm here to tell the truth, and I did. I told them about the prison, the failures, the hush money, the quiet death of a man who never should have died. I told them about my father's remorse, his fight to do better, and the system that punished those who resisted corruption more than it punished the corrupt. I gave the flash drive to the district attorney sitting in the front row. When it was over, the room sat in silence. Not judgmental, not outraged, just silent. That evening, I sat with Sarah and Linda on the porch of the cabin by Mirror Lake. The sky was bruised with dusk, and the air smelled of pine and redemption. You just destroyed the company, Sarah said softly. No, I replied. I cleared its foundation. Now I can rebuild it properly. Linda placed a hand on my arm. Your father would have been terrified, but proud. I looked out at the lake, thinking of my father's final letter. He hadn't been a perfect man, but he taught me the most important lesson he ever could. Some things are more important than being right, like being brave and being honest. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled at the small velvet box. The ring was still inside. I slipped it on my finger again, feeling the weight not of jewelry, but of generations. Tomorrow would be uncertain. Contracts might vanish, lawsuits might follow, but for the first time since returning to Millbrook, I felt peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because the foundation was finally true.